listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Who whacked McAfee? Was he Epsteined? That's what I'm going to be trying to find out in the course of this show tonight. And the earth didn't shake or free Comandante Guzman, but he's passed away. Never heard of him? Well, we'll show you the shining path in the course of this evening too. And has a Labour conference ever, at least for the last 4 decades, opened so ignominiously as this one is going to, with Keith Starmer plunging in the opinion polls, not only in amongst the voters, but his own members just don't fancy him. Mind you, independence has died in Scotland. There wasn't a jacuzzi full of frolickers for Tommy Sheridan's Hope Not Fear rally in the centre of Glasgow. And don't get me started on their demonstration of 5 dozen in the so-called Yes City of Dundee. And you'd need a heart of stone not to laugh at what's going on inside NATO. They're scrapping like ferrets in a sack over submarines, nuclear, and China. It's all coming up over the next 3 hours here on radio, on television, on the mother of all talk shows. So many platforms, I don't have time to adumbrate them. But however you're listening or watching tonight, you're in for a treat. So fasten your seatbelts. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
It is the mother of all talk shows, watched by more than 1 million people every week. That's watched, plus those that are merely listening. They're listening, so they didn't see the air quotation marks there. If you're listening in Washington, D.C., in FM clarity, you must be on 105.5. If you're listening on radio across the United States, you'll be on AM. And if you're listening across the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet and SputnikNews.com, you are most welcome. But if you are watching as well as listening, as I think it's safe to say the majority now are, then a big welcome to you. If you're watching on Facebook, please share now with all of your contacts. If you're watching on my Facebook, good. If you're watching on RT's multiple Facebook pages, that's great too. If you're watching on my YouTube channel, please subscribe, because I'm some kind of medal holder there now because of the increase in our subscribers. And of course, you can, if they're not banned, you can watch on RT's multiple YouTube channels also. You can watch on Instagram, as lucky people right now are. You can watch on Twitch. You can watch on, I think, my Telegram channel now also. And follow me on Telegram, if you will, because, as I keep saying, that's our last redoubt. If a big algorithm were to turn nasty on us, my Telegram channel might be the last redoubt. But however you're watching or listening, a big welcome to what is going to be an important show. As Oscar Wilde said on the death scene in Charles Dickens' Little Nell, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh. That's how I've felt all week as the big happy family that used to be called NATO began to tear lumps out of each other, withdraw ambassadors from capital cities, threaten retaliation. It has been simply glorious. France, which drowned its empire in blood from Côte d'Ivoire all the way to Algeria and Morocco, which spilt the blood of millions of martyrs rather than let the people of the colonies go free. France, which appears to have turned a Nelson's eye to the boats sailing out of the Channel ports laden with refugees from war-torn, famine-stricken France on their way to Britain. France, which has double-dealed on everybody all over the world for decades. France, which is up to its neck in blood in Syria and in Lebanon. France, which has become a byword for discrimination and bigotry at home, all in the name of laïcité, all in the name of secularism. France, led by the little Napoleonic dwarf, Macron, is crying into its Chablis. Is that French? Crying into its Chablis because their good friends, the United States, stabbed them in the back. Now, none of what I've said so far invalidates that judgment. They did stab them in the back. In fact, when they were frolicking in the southwest on the coast of England, when Joe Biden was threatening to walk off the pier into the waves if his wife hadn't caught him, Britain and the United States were double dealing against France and Macron at the G7 summit. Doesn't say much for French intelligence services. That's true. But it's also the case that the decision to go behind France's back, let them learn on the media that their 90 billion euro contract with Australia to build submarines was no more. Rien. It had been stolen from underneath their feet. And France is now in a position that it is going to have to respond. After all, little Macron has a presidential election coming up next year, which was going to be a tricky fixture in any case, but now he has either the opportunity of recovering the dignity of France or to go down in ignominy as the man cuckolded by Joe Biden. Joey is a baby kangaroo, you know. Cuckolded by Joe Biden, imagine. And Boris Johnson, well, he's cuckolded a fair few in his time. So which of these paths is President Macron going to take? If I were him, and let me advise him, free of charge, not a single franc will be charged for this advice. He should immediately do what his predecessors did, real French patriots and conservatives. Withdraw from the political councils of NATO and call a referendum across France on withdrawal from the NATO gang itself. Then he should take an aeroplane to Tehran. He's already done so to Baghdad, about which more later, and make peace with Iran. Become the European champion of ending American sanctions on Iran. Then take the same aircraft to Beijing and join the Chinese uproar over the AUKUS, the American-UK-Australian pact, about which more later, which is a dagger aimed at the heart of China, and from which France has just been so cruelly excluded. And then take the same airplane and go to Moscow, again like his predecessors have done. Even when Russia was communist, and now it is not, unless the Communist Party, the main opposition party in Russia, I remind you, because nobody else will. They keep talking about opposition to President Putin, but they never ever tell you that by a country mile I said, not kilometer, the main opposition in Russia is the Communist Party. France should go kiss, make up with Russia, and play a role in breaking up this ludicrous war and sanctions alliance aimed at China and Russia and Iran for no good reason at all. There you go, President Macron. That's my advice. You should take it. And if you do, you will sweep back to power in the presidential elections next year. Mind you, they might try and assassinate you like they did to General Soleimani, but then you'll be remembered as a real Napoleon, not a pretend ersatz one. But he could take a different view. He could shrug and say, I've been cucked. What am I going to do? Nothing. I'm going to tolerate it. That would guarantee his electoral defeat, because the French people, and with justification, are absolutely furious. I'll tell you what he might do. In the interim, whilst contemplating my advice, we've got it on a poll now. It's quite likely that that Nelson's eye that doesn't notice 1,000 people a week and more setting off from the hellhole of France, fleeing war, pestilence and disease, and ending up in a 4-star hotel in England at the cost of £80 a night to the British taxpayer. I'd put money on that. I'd put money on 2 Nelson's eyes now being deployed in looking out for these refugees, even though the British have paid them billions of pounds actually to do their duty and stop people leaving their shores for ours. We'll see. He may do other things. He might stop the tide of wine. I'm told that French wine sells well here. Maybe he'll stop it, but I hope that he will leave NATO. What's it all about? What did China do to Australia? What did China do to Britain? All they did was build our power stations, give us the wonders of TikTok, provide Huawei phones that we bought. Our capitalists, American capitalists, are investing in the Chinese economy. Imagine, while our governments are stabbing China daily with propaganda, with economic sanctions, with ostracism, and now with gunboats. The British and the French and the Americans have long used the Pacific Ocean and its islands as nuclear dumps. Britain has exploded, by my calculation, 45 nuclear bombs in the Pacific. Some of them in Australia. I'm not making that up. France, in waters on islands right next to New Zealand, such that New Zealand has now banned all nuclear weapons. Nuclear material are coming into their waters and their ports. You'll recall the Greenpeace ship that was blown up by France. Special forces sank the Greenpeace ship that was conducting anti-nuclear agitation in New Zealand and around it. Britain, France, and America are now vying with each other over a UK-US plan to bring nuclear submarines into Australian ports. Why? What did China do to Australia? What did they do? They didn't insult the Australian Prime Minister by not even knowing his name. All they've done is trade with Australia. But now there's a new military alliance in town, on the high seas. Nuclear armed alliance on the high seas. Who sees? The South China Seas. The clue being in the name. Of course, two of them are pedalos, Britain and Australia. The Chinese could sink the entire Navy in an afternoon, in an hour. But these pedalos are the escort ships for American gunboat diplomacy. Why? Doesn't America have more to do fixing its own problems at home? The crumbling infrastructure, the mass poverty, mass evictions, racial turmoil, awash with guns. Does America have nothing more to do at home? To throw trillions of dollars into war after war after war. $2.3 trillion they spent in Afghanistan, leaving much of the hardware behind in the hands of the obscurantists. I tell you, as I told you last week, or it may have been the week before, if there is a war with China, it will be the last war. It will be the last everything. China is not Iraq. It's not even Iran. China is the world's most populous country, with the world's biggest army, and its navy, its air force, and its nuclear force de frappe will reply, all guns blazing, to any military threat to its national sovereignty over its territory and water. Is that what you want? Do you want the world to end over a dispute of the Spratly Islands, really? Do you want the world to end over Formosa? Do you even know where it is? Can you spell it? You want your sons and daughters in Davy Jones's locker in the South China Sea? Are you mad? Are you mad, Joe Biden? Are you mad, Boris Johnson? Are you mad, that fella down under? pal, whose name nobody even knows, least of all the President of the United States that you just anchored yourself to in the AUKUS. All of that and more is coming up over the next 2 hours and 40 minutes. But here's my first break question. On this day in 1893, which country became the first in the world to give all women the right to vote? A, Germany, B, Holland, C, New Zealand. The answers right after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy, I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know. Who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God. This goes higher up than we thought.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Well, it's a real down under feel to tonight's show so far. On this day in 1893, it was New Zealand that first gave the right to vote for all women. In fact, Britain didn't do so until 1929, which means the First World War was fought by men, many of whom did not have the right to vote themselves, and all of whom had mothers, sisters, daughters, wives that had no right to vote and would not have that right until more than a decade later. Good old New Zealand. Now, here's our first poll of the evening. How will France retaliate to AUKUS? A, open the refugee flow. B, stem the tide of wine. C, leave NATO. Get the votes in now, either on my YouTube channel, on my Telegram channel, or on my Twitter feed. Now, you have to be a certain age to remember the shining path whose demonic exploits through the 1980s spilled an ocean of blood in Peru. They were a response, as I'm sure we're about to learn, from brutal dictatorship. They were a response to brutal dictatorship, a response to genocidal, racial policies of mass suppression of the indigenous people of Peru. They were a response to the looting of Peru's very considerable wealth by a tiny oligarchy of exploiters. They called themselves Maoists, although China had by then long abandoned the political positions espoused by the Maoist Sendero Luminoso, shining path. It turned out that their leader was not in the bush, in fatigues, fighting the oligarchy, but was living in a flat above a cafe and working as a university professor in the capital, Lima. But he had many supporters who used to plaster the lampposts and the walls as far away as Glasgow in Scotland, because I saw them there, inviting us to make the earth shake until the leader of the Shining Path, Alberto Guzman, was freed from the Peruvian jails. He never was. He died a prisoner in the last week. So let's hear more about that from a leading Latin American figure here in Britain, a man who is himself Peruvian, Isaac Bigio. Isaac, welcome to the show. How was my summary there of the phenomenon of the Shining Path?
Well, Abimael Guzman, he was a teacher, but in Ayacucho, and when he was in Lima, he was in a clandestine way, no? But effectively, Shining Path killed tens of thousands of people, babies, women, peasants, and in reality, what Shining Path opened was the door for a military dictatorship, because it was the terror made by Shining Path that opens the door for Fujimori in the 90s to become the most neoliberal regime in democratic Latin America. No? So since that time, all Peru has been privatized. The workers don't have too many rights in Peru, and that is because of the Fujimori said we need to repress the terrorists of Shining Path. Now, Abimael Guzman died in jail after 29 years in jail. He died on the 11th of September. And at this precise moment, there's a discussion in Peru because they wanted to incinerate his body and throw away into the sea. So worse than with Bin Laden, but when they did that, they threw the body of Bin Laden in the water, was in a military action where the USA was occupying or entering Pakistan, against the international law. But in this case, the guy was 29 years in jail and they wanted to incinerate. But Shining Path have a double action because on one hand, they kill a lot of people and they give arguments for the right wing to repress the labor movement and the people's movement. But then when Abimael Guzman was in prison, he completely changed his line. And then he said, I want to support an amnesty for everybody, even for Fujimori and Montesinos and all the torturers and paramilitaries. We are not going to fight against corruption because we want an amnesty for everybody. So he changed completely political line. Now he's dying, not as a man that was like a Che Guevara fighting for his ideas, but as a man that asked his supporters to be in favor of the freedom of all the former dictators in Peru.
They killed 80,000 people, it's thought. Who did they kill, Isaac?
Well, the official version is around 70,000 people, half of them killed by Shining Path, and the other half for other forces, especially by the official forces. But sometimes some of the killings that have been attributed to Shining Path was not made by them, But there is a lot of people killed, a lot, I think that Colombia have more, but Colombia have more than 1 million, but 70,000 people in Peru, half of them made by Shining Path is too much, But the worst crime for me that committed Shining Path was not only the crimes, which are terrible, but was that they opened the door for a neoliberal and corrupt dictatorship because, before Shining Path, nobody was going to privatize, nobody wanted to implement a Thatcherist kind of neoliberal policies. Peru had was not so socially polarized, But when they capture Abimael Guzman, they privatize absolutely everything, and Peru is more expensive in terms of water, electricity, and gas than Britain. And the wage in Peru are how much? Less than 200 euros per month, less than 180 pounds per month. So I think that the worst that Shining Path created was they made the possibility that Fujimori took power, make a neoliberal regime that has lasted 3 decades in Peru, and they used the Shining Path as an excuse to repress the movement. And now we had elections in Peru, and for the first time in 200 years, because Peru is independent on the 28th of July 1821, Peru elected a left-wing president, who is a poor guy, a teacher. His name is Pedro Castillo. And it was the most polarized election you can ever imagine, George, because the Fujimori said Castillo is a terrorist, he's Shining Path, he's a communist. I have never seen an election so much polarized, with so much slanders in my entire life in any country. But Castillo won by a little margin. But now the opposition made by Fujimori is trying to push him to adopt a hard line against everybody everybody. And they want that Castillo cremate the body of Guzman and threw away its body into the water. No?
Do they have any remaining base? Is there still any armed remnants that didn't listen to the self-serving pleas of Guzman to end their struggle, or is armed struggle in Peru over for good?
I think that the armed struggle in Peru is over for a long time. There is only a small remnant in the jungles, which is about some tens of members, which is a split group from Shining Path, that they say that Abimael Guzman is a terrorist or is a terrorist, a genocidal, and that they don't attack civilians. They only attack army officers. But it's so small, that group, so small that they don't have a press, they don't have a political positions, they are only defending the production of coca leaves and the trade. But most of the political party of Abimael Guzman said, we don't want armed struggle, we want an amnesty for everybody, even for Fujimori and Montesinos. Fujimori was a terrible dictator. He's the only former president in the Americas that has been extradited from another country to put in our country and is served in jail, perhaps until he dies. So Shining Path is in favor of an amnesty for him, for Montesinos, who was the intelligence, who was like the Peruvian Rasputin, who organized the killings of young people. They are in favor of amnesty for every paramilitary and every corrupt politician. So it's a very strange political line. So the supporters of Abimael Guzman are very, very few in Peru. And I think that the right wing is trying to inflammate the spectrum of Shining Path, because the idea of them is the following. If we create a monster, which is terrorism, we can attack more the labor rights, the ecological rights, and we can open the country for more multinationals, and we can escape corruption scandals, because most of them are extremely corrupt.
And what the origin of the political, what's the ontology of the Shining Path? They called themselves Maoists. This was quite unusual in the 1980s, and China had long left behind much of Maoism. How authentic was this Maoism?
Well, you have to understand one thing. Peru is the most oriental Western country. We have more than 1 million Chinese and Japanese that arrived in Peru as replacement of black slaves. No?
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, yes, and we have a Chinese daily paper, a Japanese daily paper, our Chinatown is perhaps as big as the London one. So, and we have a lot of Chinese words, Chinese food, and so on. So, first of all, and the second thing is that Peru was the center of the Maoist movement in the Americas in the 70s. We have like more than 10 or perhaps 20 Maoist parties. So what happened when China break with the wife of Mao Zedong, and the so-called Gang of Four, most of the Maoist parties in Peru supported Beijing. Some of them supported Albania. But there was one group that said, we support Mao's wife, and we are against Deng Xiaoping. So they were a genuine Maoist group, but they were against the change of line in Beijing, and they started to attack the Cuban, the Chinese, and the Soviet embassy, because for them, all of them become social imperialists, revisionists, and they make that incredible, silly people's war, because when the Communist Party of China started its war in 27, it's because after they were smashed by the Kuomintang and a military dictatorship, so they went into the mountains as a way to defend themselves, but they were a mass party. In the case of Shining Path, they were against the trade unions, all the rest of the left, and they entered in armed struggle just the very same day of 17th of May, 1980, of the first election after the military dictatorship. And they, instead of creating a liberated area in Peru, like in China, Mao, they didn't have like that. They create terror everywhere. So they tried to build its party through terror against unions, against peasant organizations. And at the end, this movement was not viable, and it were destroyed. And the only thing that they helped to create was a right-wing, neoliberal, anti-terrorist dictatorship. No, the only dictatorship in the Americas after the opening of the democratic elections.
Fascinating. Isaac Bigio, thank you for that tour of Peru's political history. Now, in this week, let me do the poll first. How's the poll doing? How will France retaliate to AUKUS? A, open the refugee flow, 61%. B, stem the tide of wine, 12%. C, leave NATO, 27%. Get voting on that. Now here's the break question. In this week in 1952, which famous comedian was banned from returning to the United States? Wow. A, Bob Hope. B, Lenny Bruce. C, Charlie Chaplin. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Hey you, do you want to know more of what's happening in the world right now? Of course you do. But getting to the heart of the story, well, that's going to take some hard work. That's why here at the Mother of All Talk Shows, we've created that program just for you, hosted by one of the world's most sagacious minds. Get a perspective, an education on stories from all around the world, dissected and discussed with you. Join our debate, vote in our polls on Twitter, tweet a question to George, or call in now to give us your perspective on the stories the rest of the world simply isn't talking about. Join the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees, hosted by one of the world's greatest orators. The Mother of All Talk Shows with George Galloway. Let's make sense of the world together.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The Mother of All Talk Shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
It was Charlie Chaplin that was banned from returning to the United States in 1952. Chaplin, of course, born into extreme penury, poverty, not that far from here, actually, about 1,000 yards, I said, not meters, from this very studio, was thought in the witch hunting, red baiting days of 1952 to be a communist and was refused permission to return. Now, some podcast news. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and leave us, if you will, I'm sure you would want to, a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you're a Spotify user, please follow us and share with your friends so more people can enjoy the Mother of All Talk Shows. The podcast had another excellent week. with a rise of 10% in 1 week in total downloads. We're now a permanent fixture in the UK political podcast charts and are now charting in countries, not joking, like Japan, Australia, Ireland, and many others. Remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. The poll is open on my Twitter feed, on the YouTube, and on my Telegram channel. It's not changing in proportion much. The vast majority of you thinking that France will in fact respond first to the cuckolding by Boris Johnson and Joe Biden by, well, you know the rest. Now, here's a phone call. Dustin in Idaho. Go ahead. We've got two callers in Idaho, unless Eve is Dustin. Dustin, go ahead.
Thank you, George.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'm in the United States, and my big question is like, so why do we want to fight with China? Why does America want to fight with China?
It is extraordinary. They couldn't beat the ragged-ass Taliban. They want to fight the People's Republic of China? Are they insane?
Well, because, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. And I think I definitely understand that we created the Taliban. The Americans, politicians definitely created this Taliban mess. But if China's got us outnumbered, North Korea's outnumbered, Russia would definitely ally with China, right? Absolutely. So would probably Japan. But United States are going to Russia with...
Japan is part of the Axis.
Oh, but anyway, United States is outnumbered way too huge. So my question is, like, why do we want the war? Is there really like an Agenda 21, a depopulation? Is that a thing? Do we have too many people here?
Well, I have no
Biden
idea.
A psychopath? Is Joe Biden like a psychopath?
Yeah, well, that sounds like the kind of psychopathy that would move people in that direction. I doubt if Joe Biden wants to depopulate the planet, because you've no idea what China will do in response. You've no idea which American cities will be simply eviscerated in an instant. You've no idea. You remember the Twin Towers? Think of that times 10 million. Think of the nuclear destruction that would spread across the world. You would have to be literally insane to contemplate that. And yet, Britain, Australia, and the United States are currently planning on actions which make that a very real possibility, Dustin. So what can we say?
That's my question. Why would someone want to do that?
Well, I suppose they count on China not fighting back, backing down, not retaliating, as Western navies.
Does America owe?
Yeah, it's about money and
China
power.
Trillions of dollars, trillions and trillions of dollars.
That would be a good way of cancelling America's debt to China if war were to break out between them. It's about money and power. The United States simply cannot bear that China is the #2 economy in the world and will shortly be the #1. They simply can't accept an end to American hegemony in the world.
Yeah.
Do something about it, Dustin. You're in America. You've got to change your leaders. Thanks for the call. Now, the Labour conference is about to roll out before us. It's not a pretty sight. All kinds of trouble is expected. Who better to talk to about it than a former member of Labour's National Executive Committee, a former Labour parliamentary candidate, a distinguished editor of the Labour newspaper Tribune, and a former speechwriter to the former Secretary General of the United Nations. That's right, I mean the one and only Mark Seddon. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, George. Good to see you.
And you, my friend. Now, just set the scene for us. What are the big issues that will be fought out on the floor of the Labour conference?
Well, looking at it, I mean, it has been billed as this one-off chance for Keir Starmer to finally establish his leadership and to demonstrate to the population at large that he's capable of becoming Prime Minister. And so we've had there's an awful lot of press speculation and chat and all the rest of it, but it is pretty key for Starmer to make this make or break speech. He's been promising us a 14,000-word treatise on where the Labour Party should stand with him. Let's hope we've got enough time to read it by the time the conference opens. But the backdrop to all of this, as you know, George, is the fact that the Labour Party is trailing in the polls, has trailed in the polls almost ever since Keir Starmer was elected, apart from a blip at the beginning. He has not made much of an impact. But you know, whilst there would be a lot of sympathy for him normally, I suspect, because COVID has got in the way, because he hasn't been able to go around the country, because people haven't got to see the guy, if you like, that's rather dissipated, because he promised that he was going to bring this party together and has done the exact reverse. And so I think, in looking ahead at this Labour Party conference, it's going to be about why 100-odd thousand members of this party have left, how it is that the first time in my lifetime, the Labour Party, when Jeremy Corbyn left office, had £13 million in its account because it was a mass membership party. That's all gone. And also how it is that we are seeing almost daily, and not reported anywhere in the national media in this country, really, all sorts of people being expelled on the most nebulous and absurd reasons, and including, as you know, just a couple of days ago, they tried to expel a Labour MP in the northeast of England because she had retweeted something else that another Labour MP had tweeted. This is the sort of nonsense, unfortunately, that is going to, and also this, very briefly, George, this very controversial General Secretary that Starmer put in, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure not to actually give him the job full time. A number of the big trade unions and many of the members are saying they don't want to give this man a job full time. They've seen what he's like, and they don't like the idea that Blair and Mandelson are advising Starmer as well. They don't like that.
Well, Peter Mandelson, Jeffrey Epstein's close friend, was in the Telegraph this week, or it may have been the Times, saying how much he wanted to get into the inner circle around Starmer, how he alone, with his Mephistophelian skills, could turn Starmer into a performing star. But the problem is he's just not box office. Nobody, even Peter Mandelson, could put a shine on what is essentially a pillar of wood.
Well, I mean, George, the problem is that Peter Mandelson likes to be the story. And this is the terrible mistake Starmer made from the outset. I mean, when he made this promise of bringing the party together, he could have reached out and had all sorts of people who were quite genuine around to try and help him. He appears to have gone back to these pretty grisly days of New Labour. The public really don't like Tony Blair or Peter Mandelson at all. It's only the media that seem to think that these people are important. And the fact that these British oligarchs, because let's face it, that's what they are, right? Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair are oligarchs, seem to think that they have this God-given right to run this political party as a clique. I'm afraid, people just can't stand it. So it's even more damaging to Starmer, frankly. And by the way, Mandelson tells us that he had this fantastic job in turning Neil Kinnock around. Well, he did. He trusts Neil Kinnock, the former Labour leader. You remember, George, who lost 2 elections. He turned Neil Kinnock from being this passionate Welsh orator with passionate beliefs in democratic socialism into this kind of rather weird Sergeant Major character. It failed.
Dad's Army. A Dad's Army Sergeant Major.
Yes. Corporal Mandelson's back. Yes. Do we really want him? No, I don't think we do.
Now, the ghost that will hover in the conference hall is the ghost of Jeremy Corbyn, of course, the man who currently sits as an independent MP because Starmer will not allow him to be a Labour MP, whilst at the same time being a member of the Labour Party, a kind of purgatory that I've never actually known before. How dangerous to Starmer is the current standoff with Corbyn? Will he seek to extinguish this altogether by booting Corbyn out, or will he bring Corbyn back in? Seems a small price to pay to me to stop the incipient rebellion in the party.
I mean, it is a quite extraordinary thing that you decide to boot out the former leader of the Labour Party effectively from Parliament, which is what Keir Starmer did. A very personal decision. That's what it was. It's very difficult to see under which rules this actually happened properly. But I mean, it is just to stand back wherever you are in the world and imagine, there was a leader of a political party, and then his replacement comes in and then boots him out because he doesn't like what he has to say. I mean, it is an extraordinary situation. It's caused a lot of upset and aggravation. I mean, for what it's worth, I think after all these years that I had in the Labour Party, 40 odd years, I always knew that back in the 70s and the 80s and what have you, the left and the right of the party, essentially they could disagree, but they could all come together because essentially they had a worldview, which was, we have to represent working people. That's what a Labour Party is there for. It says it on the box. I don't see that anymore between the left and the right. I think these two groups are incompatible. And so what you've got happening this week, during the Labour conference, is this event called The World Transformed, at which Jeremy Corbyn will speak. My guess, unless they've got complete control over everything, is that Corbyn's going to get a better reception during that conference than the official leader is. I mean, what a farcical situation it is. And so, yeah, of course, it would make absolute sense for Keir Starmer to have Jeremy Corbyn back as a Labour MP. I mean, he essentially said he believed that reports of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party were exaggerated. Well, many of us think that they were. So why should he be kicked out from being a Labour MP for saying that? An utter absurdity.
Now, you mentioned the trans word, though you didn't mean it that way. The world transformed. One thing seems to unite the left and the right of the Labour Party. The continuing infatuation with a state of being, of mind, that affects a tiny proportion of even 1% of the British population, namely the self-declaration by a man that is now a woman, which we're told by the deputy leader, no less, in a tweet just yesterday. Labour is absolutely committed to a Gender Recognition Act which enshrines the right of self-declaration on the part of trans people, making it ipso facto a criminal offence for us or anyone to deny that science-defying, biology-defying metamorphosis. Why has the Labour Party fallen hook, line and sinker for this fringe student politics infatuation?
Well, I kind of wish I knew the answer to that, because it's like a lot of us. I mean, but by the way, I'm as opposed to discrimination against transgender people as I am to anybody else. The issue, as we all know, you mentioned, is this self-identification. Well, look, people can self-identify all they like, but I mean, there are certain biological facts. There are certain racial facts as well. I mean, somebody could say, well, as they did in America, I self-identify as African-American when they were Caucasian. Clearly nonsensical stuff. The point is, this is a fringe issue. I feel sorry for people if they are discriminated against. I'm opposed to discrimination in every single which way, but you cannot have a situation whereby all the political parties in the establishment are prepared to make this an expellable offence if you say I am a woman, and as is happening with some of these political parties. And I read today you were described as being gender critical. Well, I mean, look, apart from anything else, this is anathema to 95% of the population. They don't understand it. Frankly, if you want to hand over power to the right in this country and to the Tory party in perpetuity, carry on with all of this stuff, because most people don't get it and they don't like it. So, no, I mean, it really makes no sense whatsoever. There is this issue of this Labour MP. I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen what abuse that she says that she's faced. She's saying, because she is gender critical, that she's being attacked by people and being accused of being transphobic in the most vitriolic ways. Well, she says that she's not going to go to the conference now, and the Speaker of the British Parliament has said that's unacceptable and that she shouldn't be frightened of going to a party conference. I mean, it's a pretty pass, really. But there again, we live in times where it's very difficult sometimes to have an honest opinion and to express it without offending somebody or without getting people extremely angry. And it'd be great if you could have decent debates, such as this one, you could say. But no, it's a bizarre obsession and very corrosive. It is kind of the weirdest kind of identity politics I've seen, because really it gets in the way of class politics, which is what really all matters and motivates people to do things. And I think it gets in the way of the left winning again, frankly.
Lastly and briefly, Mark, it's obvious, if you think about it, from what Mandelson said in the week, that the Blairites recognise that Starmer isn't quite cutting it. They say they want to help him begin to cut it, but they know that you can't polish certain things in life. What's their plan B? Do they have a prince over the water that they would like to bring back? Is Tony Blair a potential returnee to power? What are they going to do when it's clear to everybody that Starmer has dismally failed?
Well, we understand that part of the plan this coming conference is to cause some major standoff. So this is going. But if this is the case, and it's all about creating Keir Starmer as the Neil Kinnock, they're actually telling us that they know that Starmer cannot win. That frankly, they've worked out that he's a political dud. So there is that. What do they really plan? I don't know. I really don't know. Their prince across the water has been David Miliband in New York. But the problem with all of these princes across the water or princes up north or wherever they might be is they're not actually in Parliament. And I know that Starmer's got this new idea of actually having candidates that don't have to be members of the Labour Party. Believe it or not, he's got a whole bunch of people who are being fast-tracked. He wants to change the rule whereby you don't have to be, you can be a member of the Labour Party for under a year and then be a candidate.
Maybe it's you and me they've got in mind, Mark. Maybe it's people like us they want to bring back. Marvellous talking to you. Thanks for that vivid description of the many dilemmas being faced by the British Labour Party. In the next hour, we'll be talking about McAfee. Who whacked him? Was he Epsteined? And we'll be talking about China. So stay tuned, because first, we have to have the news with Jamie Lowe.
Radio Sputnik News.
The new security arrangement between Britain and the United States to supply nuclear submarines to Australia will make the world safer and could create hundreds of new jobs, the new British Foreign Secretary has claimed. Liz Truss said it showed the UK's readiness to be hard-handed in defending its interests. But France, whose own submarine deal with Australia was thwarted as a result, has criticised the agreement. It has recalled its ambassadors in the US and Australia for consultation in response, while China has accused the three powers of having a Cold War mentality. The alliance, called AUKUS, widely seen as an effort to counter China's influence in the contested South China Sea, was announced by US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison on Wednesday. France's foreign minister has accused Australia and the US of lying over the deal. Speaking yesterday, Jean-Yves Le Drian said a serious crisis was in progress between the allies. The fact that for the first time in the history of relations between the United States and France, we are recalling our ambassador for consultations is a serious political act which shows the magnitude of the crisis that exists now between the countries, he said. But he said France had seen no need to recall its ambassador to the UK, accusing the country of constant opportunism. China's President Xi Jinping is yet to commit to attending this year's climate change summit in Glasgow. COP26 President Alok Sharma has admitted earlier this month Sharma held 2 days of talks in China ahead of the international summit being hosted by the UK in Glasgow in November. But asked today if Xi had committed to being in Scotland for the gathering of world leaders, Sharma said no, not yet. He also admitted that China would be key to the climate change talks as the country is one of the world's biggest polluters. Philippine boxing star Manny Pacquiao says he will run for president in next year's election. He was nominated as a candidate by a faction of the ruling party PDP Laban. On top of a glittering career as a fighter and world champion, Pacquiao, 42, is a senator in the Philippines parliament. Incumbent Rodrigo Duterte is barred from another term but has been picked by a rival party faction to run for vice president, a move critics say is an attempt to cling onto power. US officials have moved thousands of migrants away from a Texas border town that has seen an influx of mostly Haitian migrants over the past week. More than 10,000 people had gathered under a bridge connecting Del Rio in Texas to Mexico's Ciudad Acuña. Local officials have struggled to provide them with food and adequate sanitation. Some 2,000 people were moved to immigration and processing stations on Friday. The US government says it plans to fly the migrants back to where they began their journeys. Flights are expected to start today. 4 amateur astronauts have splashed down successfully in the Atlantic Ocean after 3 days in space. They are the first private or civilian team ever to orbit the Earth. The Inspiration 4 crew left on a SpaceX capsule from Florida on Wednesday and landed off the state's coast after 7 p.m. local time on Saturday. The Inspiration 4 team was led by Jared Isaacman, 38, chief executive of the e-commerce firm Shift4 Payments Inc., who acted as mission commander. He paid an undisclosed sum estimated by Time magazine to be about $200 million to fellow billionaire Elon Musk for 4 seats aboard the Crew Dragon. President Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party is expected to easily beat the 13 other parties taking part in the Russian parliamentary and local elections. Polls open on Friday and closed at 8 p.m. today. The former England football striker and Tottenham's record goal scorer Jimmy Greaves has died at the age of 81. Greaves began his career with Chelsea before spells at AC Milan, Spurs and West Ham. He scored 44 goals in 57 games for England and was a member of the 1966 World Cup winning squad, although he did not play in the final. He holds the record for the most goals in the English top flight with 357 and scored 266 in 379 matches for Tottenham. Greaves' 41 goals in 1960 to 1961 remains a record in a season for Chelsea, and he also holds the Spurs record with 37 between 1962 and 63. And finally, it's the incredible shrinking country. The Netherlands has long been the world's tallest nation, but its people are getting shorter, according to Dutch researchers. Although height has increased over the last 100 years, the study showed that Dutch men born in 2001 were 1 centimetre, almost half an inch, shorter than their 1980 counterparts. For women, the difference was more pronounced, with a difference of 1.4 centimetres. The 1980 generation were the tallest ever, benefiting from a huge height increase. Men born in 1980 stood at an average height of 6 feet and were over 3 inches taller than those born in 1930. Women born in 1980 were also significantly taller at 5.6 feet, 2 inches taller than those born in 1930. The study by Statistics Netherlands, the Municipal Health Service and the National Institute for Public Health surveyed 719,000 Dutch-born individuals between the ages of 19 and 60 who self-reported their height and used an average height at age 19 as the benchmark. The reason for the height decrease is partly related to increased levels of immigration from shorter population groups, according to researchers. However, growth also tapered off for individuals whose parents were born in the Netherlands, and for those whose 4 grandparents were all Dutch-born. Previous studies suggested it could be due to an increased focus on plant-based diets and environmental factors. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
No tuition fees, and you are encouraged to speak back to the teacher at this Open University of the Airwaves. Here's the numbers. If you're calling from the United Kingdom, and remember, calls are completely free. The number to call on is 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're a first-time caller, I'll be extremely gentle with you. If you are a woman caller, you are especially welcome. If you want a verbal punch-up, if you've got the guts and you're hard enough, come on, call me. 08081 965522. If you're in the United States or Canada, for that matter, someone wrote to me this week asking which number should they ring, their old colonial number or the behemoth next door. If you're in the United States or Canada, it's also completely free, toll-free. It'll cost you nothing at all, and the number is +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. You can also email us anytime on air at moats.tv, or you can tweet, of course, on my Twitter feed or RT UK Twitter feed, preferably both. The poll is not showing any changes. Most people think that the French will retaliate by opening the refugee flow of people seeking to escape the hellhole of France and arrive in England on the south coast. Hardly any of you think they'll shut off the wine, and only a quarter of you think that France will leave NATO. A little bit surprising to me, that. I think there's a very real possibility that they will. Now, I don't know about you, but I've spent decades paying money to somebody called McAfee. I actually never knew that it was a person, just a faceless corporation that I was paying money to protect my computer. So far, so good, but not for Mr. McAfee, for he was indeed a real person. McAfee, John McAfee, as we would call him in this country, McAfee as he's known in the United States, was, well, take your pick. Like Jeffrey Epstein, he may have genuinely committed suicide. Or like Jeffrey Epstein, the suicide may have come as a big surprise to him. One man has studied this matter in very great detail. He is the author and ghostwriter Mark Eglinton, and he joins us now. A ghostwriter, huh, Mark? I think you should write McAfee's posthumous memoirs. Tell us why you're interested and why we should be.
Well, let me explain and tell you that this book actually is his memoirs. John contacted me in 2019 while he was on the run and said, I want you to ghostwrite my autobiography. And that's what we agreed to do. However, given how complex his situation was, that situation changed halfway through the process when he wanted cryptocurrency from a publisher, didn't have an address to contact with, et cetera, et cetera. So he ended up pulling out of the project, leaving me with it. And this book that is coming out towards the end of the year is conversations between he and I, which are essentially his life story. So, I mean, when you say that I should ghostwrite his memoirs, I more or less have, because almost all the words are his. So that's where we are.
Why was he of interest to you?
I mean, John, I don't know how much the listeners know about John. John lived the most incredible life in every sense. I mean, the pre-McAfee years, before he even... I mean, the company he founded, which you referred to earlier, was founded by accident. He had no aspirations whatsoever to be a corporate figure. He was somebody who enjoyed living, and earning money was simply a means to continue living. And when he walked away from McAfee Associates in 1992, he didn't sell it. People think that he sold out. He didn't. He just walked away. But also what happened was he benefited greatly from the flotation of the company on the stock exchange at that time. So he had unlimited money, and from that point onward, he did basically what he wanted in life, built houses, traveled to foreign countries, literally got bounced around by the chaos of the world, which is easy to do, granted, if you have upwards of $100 million. But that's the kind of life he lived, and he was just fascinating. And I just thought, I couldn't believe he'd never written an autobiography. And the fact that he was on the run at the time when he was contacting me made it even more appealing. I just couldn't believe that there was a situation where I could write a book with a guy who was on the run. And that's what we did. So, yeah, that brings us to now. And sadly, John won't be here to read this book when it comes out later this year.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing for the sales or not. It's certainly a new layer of mystery, isn't it? He was a rum character, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, anyone who knows anything about John knows he went to Belize. They will know that he ran from Belize when he was being framed by the Belizean government while also being accused of a murder. A murder I firmly believe, based on all the conversations I had with him, he did not commit. Nevertheless, he faked a heart attack in Guatemala. He's faked a stroke elsewhere while on the run. This is a guy whose life force, even at the age of 74, which he was when I was talking to him, was undiminished. So, you know, people have asked me numerous times in the aftermath of his sad death, do I think that John committed suicide? And, you know, I'll never have the answer to that, the definitive answer. What I will say is that there was nothing in any of the conversations I ever had with him which suggested that he didn't want to keep living. You know, that's all I can say. All of his moves that he's made over the last 3 or 4 years have been designed to keep living. So that's all I can say about that part of it.
Well, can you say why there might be any doubt that he committed suicide?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, it's well known. He made it well known that he was being pursued by the CIA. He firmly believed that. He believed that, I mean, his stance on taxation in the US was one whereby he hadn't filed tax returns. Not only that, I mean, there's plenty of people who don't file tax returns, but he was going out on a public stage discussing cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency, as some people might think, is a means of avoiding paying tax. He was going around on a yacht telling people, I haven't filed tax returns, and here's how you don't have to either. And he believes that he became a problem to the US government to the extent that somebody might try and collect him. And he told me that on a number of occasions. And in fact, some of the conversations in the book are about his knowledge of the intricacies of how the CIA works. Because this is a man who supplied the CIA in his early days of McAfee Associates. He knew how that operation worked.
And where did he die, commit suicide, or was killed?
In a prison in Barcelona.
How was he, why was he in a prison in Barcelona?
Well, he was on the run when I was talking to him for the book that we did together. And what I didn't know at the time was that he was on the run in Spain. And at some point during 2020, he boarded a flight in Barcelona airport on a UK passport. He was a dual UK and US citizen and was apprehended by people presumably contracted by the US authorities on a flight to Istanbul. And from there, he was imprisoned in Barcelona pending deportation to the US.
And he made some kind of prediction, like others, that he would be suicided by the authorities, didn't he?
Yeah, the whacked theory is one that he put out there a year and a half before his death, to the extent he got a tattoo with whacked on his arm and posted on Twitter that if he is ever whacked, that he didn't do it. It would be, he was comparing his situation to Epstein and was indeed suggesting that Epstein didn't commit suicide. So yeah, he did kind of predict it. But this was the kind of thing John did. John was somebody who liked manipulating his public persona. He enjoyed doing that. It could easily be a red herring.
Yeah. Was there an investigation into his death? Was there a proper coroner's inquiry or the Catalan equivalent?
Well, things have been slow in Spain. He died on June the 23rd. There was an initial autopsy that ruled suicide, which was disputed by his wife, Janice, who's in Spain now. There's been various legal to and fro up to the point when the Spanish authorities, I think Spain shuts down in August, essentially for a holiday. And my understanding is that there is more to come from this in September, later on this month, in fact, when Spain opens up again. But it's certainly not resolved. I wouldn't like to say that this is resolved at this point. It's still very much open.
And how much of his $100 million did he get through, and how much does Janice stand to inherit?
He was broke. I said this to another source when I was asked after his death. I firmly believe John had no money when he died. And people say, oh, well, how can you have $100 million? And that was conservative, that number. But this is a guy, and as I said to you earlier, he enjoyed just living. And in the book, he talks about building houses in Ecuador, spending $25 million on a house that he never set foot in. He built half a dozen houses of this kind all over the US, in Hawaii, in Belize. Never bothered about even going to any of them, or some of them. So this wasn't somebody who was bothered about spending money. And I believe that by the time he was imprisoned, he was basically bankrupt.
And does his wife think he was whacked?
She doesn't believe he committed suicide. And I, for the same reasons I don't. I mean, he was eternally positive. Her last communication with him was earlier that day, where he said, I love you, I'll talk to you tomorrow, type of thing. There was no suggestion that this was on his mind. And John's somebody who would be pretty honest about that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure that if he had this kind of thing in his mind, he wouldn't mind saying so, and he didn't.
Was he alone in his cell when he passed away?
He was. That part of it's a bit confusing. There was a cellmate who was with John during the time in prison. The cellmate was not there at the time of his death. That part of it is a bit cloudy, as is the aspect of the CCTV footage from the cell at the time. That's something that's still to come out.
So tell us about the book. What's it called? Where can we get it, and when?
The book is called No Domain, The John McAfee Tapes. And basically this is John McAfee and I sitting down for over 6 months, and me talking about his life to him and him talking back. And John was a myth in the public eye, even a meme. But the John McAfee that I spoke to was the actual person. I'm convinced that I got a vision of him through these conversations nobody's ever seen before. And it's just fascinating. His insight into human nature, into cryptocurrency, into internet security, into privacy, the workings of government is just fascinating. And it will be out later this year. The publication date is to be confirmed, because obviously when he passed, we tried to move that date up, which we're still trying to do. But it will be later this year. I'm hoping November. And it will be available at all good bookstores, Amazon, all the usual bookstores. And I can't wait for people to read it.
You may have a big seller on your hands. Thank you very much, Mark Eglinton, author of and ghostwriter of No Domain, the McAfee tapes. Now, in this week, did I tell you it was Charlie Chaplin? Yeah, I did. So, in 1992, the British MP David Mellor resigned as Heritage Minister, blaming his departure on the tabloid press. Which football team did he support? It's actually confusing, so let me reinterpret that. Because I know what football team he supported because I knew him well. But it's not one of these three options. What they mean is, what football jersey was he allegedly wearing, if you know what I mean, when he was swinging from the chandelier? Was it A, Arsenal, B, Chelsea, C, Millwall? No one likes us. We don't care. Time for a break.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Now, David Mellor, whom I knew well, was a Fulham supporter. But allegedly, he liked to swing from the chandelier with women who were not his wife while wearing a Chelsea strip. At least that's how the Sun newspaper reported the sting. So it was a Chelsea strip he wore, though he never actually supported Chelsea. Like John Major, he supported Fulham. But politically, it became useful to Mellor to be associated with the multi-billionaires that owned Chelsea. Let's take some calls, why don't we? From Carl in Swindon. Go ahead, Carl.
Good evening, George. Can you hear me okay?
Very well, thank you.
That's right. Thank you very much for letting me join the show. This is my second time on the show. Thank you.
Welcome.
I was going to call about the China thing, but one of your previous callers made some very good observations there. But no, what I called for was something you said about the transgender issue.
Yeah.
And I know you're quite conservative on that with a small c, and to a certain degree, I understand where you're coming from, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but to me, to call it an affectation or student politics, I think is a bit unfair, because for those individuals concerned, it's a very real issue.
Sure, I'm sure it is. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise, but a major political party fighting for power in the state cannot afford to infatuate about issues that go against the grain of the majority of people and affect only a tiny number of people, surely.
Yes, you could argue in the grand scheme of things, it's not a hill to die on, but then you could say that about a few other issues, about homosexuals and that, they had to fight hard for their cause.
Sure, and I supported them. Yeah.
But no, what I wanted to say, okay, yes, on the grand scheme of things, it might not be important, but while we're talking about it, we get a lot of populist arguments, accurately or inaccurately. It makes nice sensationalist copy, but for those involved, it's very distressing. I mean, I can speak from personal...
Well, let's take just one example, Carl. A former U.S. Marine Special Forces knocked hell out of a girl in the boxing ring in the United States the other week and won the championship. Why is it distressing to that former U.S. Marine Special Forces soldier who plastered a girl all over a boxing ring, for me to say he should not have been fighting her? Girls boxing, women's boxing is for girls and women, not for big, powerful Marines who declare themselves to be a woman. Why is that distressing? I think the girl had more right to be distressed, don't you?
I agree with that. I'm aware of that story, but that's just one side of the argument. There's sporting issues there, which, yes, I can go along with. This is why I'm saying this is a very complex subject. It's not a black and white thing, although I do agree with that instance. It was just outrageous. I do agree with that.
Well, it means that women's sport will no longer exist because...
Yes, I'm not disputing that. I didn't want to talk about
Emma Raducanu will one day be succeeded by an ex-SAS man who has defined himself as a woman, even though he isn't. Surely you can see the reasons why people like me that you describe as conservative, people like me cannot accept that, will not accept it. We defend women and women's rights.
George, you've made your point there, and I'm accepting that. I'm not disagreeing with you on that. But now I'm losing my thread here of what I was going to try and say, that with certain individuals, I mean, I can speak from personal experience because I have a close relative who's gone through this process, who's been subjected to prejudices because of going through this change. It's actually my brother, who's now obviously going through to be a female, and now has gone through the change. Yes, it was a shock at the time when I heard about it, but it's cool. She's happy in who she is, wants to be, and she's going through the change, and is living as a woman, identifies as a woman. I think she's got the legal identification to say so, and she's accepted professionally. That's not an issue. So I think,
good luck to her. Good luck to her. I sat down outside a cafe in Queensway just a few weeks ago and was sat down by a person who turned out to be the brother of an old and close comrade of mine in Scotland, except the brother was entirely dressed as a woman and wearing makeup and so on. I sat and chatted with the brother as he wanted to be addressed, as he wanted to be related to. I even kissed his cheek as I left. I'm ready to treat people as women if they want to be treated as women, but I'm not going to, even if you put me on the rack like Galileo, claim that a man is a woman. I can't. It would be an offense against science. Carl?
That's what I'm saying. It's a complex subject. There's a lot, we've got a long way to go on this path for people. There's a lot of education needed to understand, the basics.
I think that's a fair point. I think that's a fair point, Carl. But what's happening is not education. It is intellectual terrorism. People are no platformed for saying what I just said. People lose their jobs for saying what I just said.
Oh, I agree with you on that point. Yes, on the political side, there's people that are, getting a bit Stalinist about that. I do agree with you on that point. Yes, I totally agree. People should be able to state their opinions. Women should not be denied the fact that they can say that. I agree with that entirely. But we need to learn more about what transgender is. We need to be grown up about it and, like you say, get away from all this populist sensationalism. It's not doing the cause any good at all.
Well, no, it's not doing the cause any good at all. It's actually the people who are conducting this reign of intellectual terror are not only not doing the cause any good, they are completely discrediting it. When someone like Germaine Greer, one of the world's original leading feminist authors and academics, cannot set foot in a university because she'll be assailed as a transphobe. When J.K. Rowling, one of the most benign people in the land and much loved in the land, is cancelled because of alleged transphobia for which no evidence can be adduced.
Yeah. Like I say, it's a big, complex subject, and there needs to be some more grown-up discussions about it. I thank you for your time, George.
I thank you for your call, Carl, in Swindon. Thank you for it. Orion in California is up next. Go ahead, Orion.
Yeah, I'm from California. Hey, George, you are hip. You're a really cool guy, and
Thank you. Although the last guy said I was conservative.
Yeah. Well, you know, some of us are and some of us aren't.
Exactly.
You know, we got to build the working class movement, the international working class movement.
Here, here.
Against
now you're talking. You're talking my language.
I know, man. I saw you fighting in Congress, you know, that YouTube video, and then I started watching most, about 40 episodes. And me and my girlfriend are ex-radical. Well, we're radicals because we're for Julian and Edward Hale. But we started in the 60s, and I started when they wanted me to fight in Vietnam and kill Vietnamese women and children and destroy the livestock and bulldoze the jungles and Agent Orange. And I joined the Navy for 30 days to avoid the draft. And then I said bye because my friends were in the civil rights movement. And I had heard about pacifism and nonviolent resistance, and I was white. And after 30 days, the Navy said, you're unable to adjust the military service. So
well,
that's
good.
My background.
I salute you for that, Orion.
Yes. And people have to honor not just well, I don't even think that people should be honored. I think that all this bullshit about veterans of war should be honored. I don't think they should be particularly honored for killing Vietnamese people and killing Iraq people.
No, I'm honoring you because you refused to do it.
Yeah, and that's what we have to push. And that's why I didn't support, what's her name, Tulsi Gabbard, because she wanted to be the chief of staff of the military. She was great. She supported Julian. But she wanted to be, what do they call that when you're the chief of staff of military in the United States government? What is that called? That's what you are, right? Mm-hmm. I'm trying to get my words straight, and I'm 77 years old. So,
well, you're a cool 77-year-old. Orion, keep listening, keep calling. We're snowed under with calls tonight, so I'm going to cut you short and go to Richard in Manchester. Go ahead, Richard.
Good evening, George. Absolutely fantastic show again. I'm listening intently to a lot of this.
Thank you.
This Keir Starmer thing that's reared its head over the last couple of years, I don't think he was put in there as somebody for the future of the party. I just have an opinion that the Blairites and the world domination and the global people and the EU and all this about Scotland and separating from Great Britain is the biggest thing that has happened to us in an awful long time. Mm-hmm. I'd love your opinion on it. If they're going to, Keir Starmer will never be the Prime Minister of England.
Never.
And I think he knows that. And I've got a good bet with somebody to give to charity if he ever did. And I know in my own heart George. I was a socialist, brought up a socialist. My father was a coal miner, and only once in my lifetime did I ever vote for anything other than that, and that was to get us out of the EU. And I was ashamed to do that, but I felt that was the only way forward that we could go because of Mrs. May's intransigence and wanting to stay in and trying to con the country into doing that. And I'm only speaking facts as they evolved over the last, 3 or 4 years. And I believe that the globalists are now trying to split Scotland from the EU to get us back into the EU, which I think will be an impossibility. And I only wish that people like yourself and people like Farage and one or two other people had been able to lead us forward. And I remember your show once, going back a few years, and you were talking to Farage, and you were saying, won't it be wonderful if we could get back into Parliament? Having said all that, what happened was, I think he got ill or he got sick of the whole thing, having fought a lone battle for many, many years, along with just a few people who had what can I say, George, the intro into the media to get any results. He fought the battle with everyone else who was interested in getting out, and he's done, for me, a great job.
Well, there's no doubt he's entered history as the man most responsible for Britain finally being able to leave the European Union. I don't agree with him about much else other than that, but that is a pretty big thing. Richard, thanks for your kind words. Victor is in Alabama. Must go there. Go ahead, Victor.
Hi, George. I just wanted to ask you for some advice. So I've recently infiltrated a few national socialist organizations. And the thing that surprised me was that there is an actual backlog of people joining. It's throughout the West. And the fact that it's growing so rapidly recently.
Really?
What can someone like me do who's kind of already inside of it to fight back against it?
You could show people where it all ended in Auschwitz, in the incineration and gassing of tiny infants and young women and old women and young men and boys and old men. You could show them how it all brought Germany to absolute ruin, and the death and destruction spread throughout the world. That's what I do when confronted with anyone who is even remotely leaning in that direction. But equally, we have to indict the political class in Western countries, including yours and mine, which have so entirely failed the people that some individuals end up in these dead ends of extremism and fanaticism. They end up sociopathic. They end up even psychopathic. They've been driven quite literally mad in many cases by the absolute failure of the Tweedledee, Tweedledum political class, two cheeks of the same ass political class. That's what we also need to do. Last word to you, Victor.
So, yeah, I've tried to show some of them that, and they're just in constant denial because they call it opening up their eyes, and I keep telling people you're opening up your eyes to a failed ideology at the end of the day, and they don't want to admit the truth.
Mm. Well, you're a very courageous man to be doing what you're doing, but fascism, Nazism is the road to hell. It's the road to perdition. It always has been, and it has not changed. It feeds upon hate against other individuals for characteristics over which they had no choice. It seeks to defend, ultimately, a political and economic system which has beggared most of the world, and which is the fundamental ailment of society. Thank you very much for that call. Les Calderwood says, the French have always been fabulous winners, but really atrocious losers. In this case, they haven't dished out enough cake. The EU have not spent on defence, and I don't blame the Australians desiring the latest state-of-the-art submarines. Although Les doesn't add why Australia in particular would need the latest state-of-the-art submarines. Don in Sunderland, or Don Sunderland I should say, says they've already opened the refugee flow, and stemming the tide of wine will hurt them more so. So I guess leave NATO is the only option left. I just can't see them doing it without a joint EU military alternative in place. My guess is they'll settle for recalling their ambassadors. And Key says they'll close Euro Disney. Very good. Very good. Right, we've dealt with David Mellor and his infamous football strip. In 1998, then US President Bill Clinton's evidence to the grand jury in the Monica Lewinsky affair was released. What colour was the dress in question? Who writes this stuff? A, black, B, red, C, blue. I'm not going to specify why that's important or what was on the dress or any of that, because that would be beneath me. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Tom says after independence we could choose the government we want. Tom, could you not have called me and argued that nonsense? Couldn't you? What's wrong with you, man? You've had the vaccine. Go ahead.
When I came out, I went into a boxer stance and started doing a jig. And an old fella said, "Hey, have you just had that vaccine?" I said, "Aye." And he said to his wife, "Come on, love, you better get me one of them." He said, "Make me dance."
So you're full of life. And Ben says, could Scotland actually do better autonomously? Like I want California to secede. But I think we'd thrive if not burdened by the rest of the US. How very revealing of you, Ben. How utterly revealing of you. And Philip says, how any Labour or Tory supporter has the nerve to say the SNP are corrupt is beyond me. Why do you people not have the guts to call up instead of cowering behind one single name on social media?
There's a lot of people in Bradford who won't be taking this antivirus due to religious grounds.
Simon, what do you mean by religious grounds?
Religious grounds, I mean, many Muslims, for example, have issues with regards to this vaccine. Certain things.
Tell me what issues? What issues?
Well, for example, pork.
What does pork have to do with this vaccine?
You're kind of, again, you're clouding the issue here. There's the religious.
I'm not clouding the issue. You said pork.
Of course you
said pork.
But
Simon,
other things which
are you yourself a Muslim?
It doesn't matter whether I am or not.
It does, because you are purporting. No, it does.
It's justified for people to ask that.
Be quiet for a moment, please.
No, I won't. It's justified.
Well, you will, because I'll turn your volume down. This is dangerous, reckless, ignorant, and potentially fatal nonsense. Get out of my sight and don't come back.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Monica Lewinsky's dress was blue. At least it was at the start of the evening. Let's talk with Ignacio in Madrid. Go ahead, Ignacio.
Hello, George.
Hi.
I'm the same caller from last week. Just that I didn't get myself clear with the producers for the name.
No problem. Go ahead.
I would like to make a couple of points about the situation in Afghanistan, if I may.
Go on.
So, George, we've obviously seen a disaster of a campaign, 20-year campaign.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen a disaster of a retreat. I think we are in danger of missing what is the real cause of all this mess that's been Afghanistan for the last 20 years and more. And that is the reckless U.S. policy in Afghanistan. 1977, Jimmy Carter and Brzezinski, they decided that they had to have a war involving the Soviet Union to bankrupt them. And as a result of their actions, 40 years on, Afghanistan is still at war. So everything from the 10-year bloody war of the Soviets to the endless civil war in Afghanistan to the 9/11 atrocity. Let's bear in mind, Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan because the U.S. pushed these people to power, put them in power with all the resources of the country at the disposal of Osama bin Laden.
And they hailed them. The Washington Post had a picture of Osama bin Laden and described them as the heirs to George Washington.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan met with them in the Oval Office.
Indeed. He said they were the equivalent of the founding fathers.
Yeah, what I want to say, George, is that if you recall 9/11, then not 4 weeks afterwards, October the 7th, the U.S. started this war.
Yeah.
Less than 4 weeks of preparation.
Yeah.
Now, I claim no military expertise, George, but I dare say that 4 weeks to prepare an operation this size is not too much. You have to be a genius to arrange for all of this in less than 4 weeks. Okay? If you look back at what happened this year in Afghanistan this summer, all NATO countries weren't able to retreat in 4 weeks, but they were able to put all the machinery together, including private contractors, in 4 weeks. Now, 6 weeks, and they got the Patriot Act, a law that basically undermined all the U.S. legislation in terms of civil liberty and rights for detainees. And the result of all this recklessness has been endless war in Afghanistan, 40 years of it, of different strands, different kinds of sides involved in the fighting, but it's been 40 years of endless war. And the crime that they perpetrated on that country and the reverberations of that crime cannot be overestimated at this point.
Well, I look, that is a masterful tour of the Afghan situation. I couldn't better it. It's an absolutely brilliant call, and I'm going to leave it at that. Don't be a stranger. We need your wisdom here in the Open University of the Airwaves. Let's hear from Imran in Washington, D.C. on bin Laden. Go ahead, Imran.
Hello, how are you, George?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Thanks for the call. Go ahead.
I called you on this platform to actually challenge your views on bin Laden because
Go ahead.
I've actually been waiting for this moment because I believe personally that bin Laden is being portrayed in a very cartoonish manner.
Okay, go ahead.
And And the thing is that, you know, like the common narrative is that bin Laden was a mindless mass murderer. I don't see him that way. I actually see him as a freedom fighter. I mean, I'm not an Islamist, but I actually came here on this platform to actually shed a different light on his character and to actually defend his legacy. Because
you're not an Islamist, but
really
you want to defend bin Laden's legacy, right? Go on.
I mean, I don't see him as a terrorist. I see him more as the reincarnation
what
of
were the
Salah ad-Din
attacks
himself.
on the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi and elsewhere in East Africa? What were these, if not terrorist attacks? They killed, slaughtered huge numbers of black African people standing outside the embassies. If that's not terrorism, what is?
Well, I mean, he had his reasons. He clearly had his reasons.
Well, I'm not asking about reasons. I'm asking you to defend the slaughter of hundreds of people in Tanzania and in Kenya, black Africans who were slaughtered for no other reason than that they happened to be in the vicinity of the American embassy. I'm asking you, if that's not terrorism, what is terrorism?
Well, that was terrorism, but his real aim was not those black Africans. His real aim was hitting the superpower where it hurt the most.
What matter was not what his aim was, but what he did, and not once, but twice, in adjoining countries.
Yeah, but let's be honest. The number of people killed by bin Laden is ridiculous compared to the number of people killed, by the other side. I mean, the other side.
That's just whataboutery. That's just whataboutery. You're on here to defend bin Laden's legacy. I'm asking you to defend it, not by saying that somebody else committed even more crimes than him. You're here to defend your thesis that bin Laden was not a terrorist.
Yeah, because he didn't kill people for no reason. I mean, he
killed all those Africans for no reason. His supporters killed 55 people on London buses and on the underground in his name. They were killed for no reason.
Yeah, because he wanted his idea was that if you're going to kill us, if you're going to kill one of us, our people, without any distinction, then his approach was like an eye for an eye approach.
Oh yes.
If I could put it to you this way.
There is no Islamic justification for that, of course. Imran, you may not be an Islamist, as you say. But I'm inferring that you are a Muslim. It is a sin in Islam to kill innocent people for the crimes of guilty people, isn't it?
Of course it is, but as I said, this is war. I mean, people.
No, it wasn't. The Quran very clear about what you're allowed to do in war. And one of the things you are definitively not allowed to do is kill innocent people for the crimes of guilty people. It's forbidden. Are you a Muslim,
yes,
Imran?
Well, I'm actually a deist. I'm an ex-Sunni Muslim.
Okay, so you, as an ex-Sunni Muslim, you're well familiar with the Quranic incantation that to kill an innocent soul is as to kill the whole of humanity. You must remember that from your days as an ex-Sunni Muslim, mustn't you?
Of course I do. I absolutely remember it, but you have to put it into context.
No, but you're saying it's war. It's not war to kill women on a London bus. because you hate what Tony Blair has done? That's not war. That is actually specifically excluded in your former religion.
Yes, it is.
You're not even allowed to destroy trees belonging to your enemies in war in Islam. How come you don't know that?
I know that, but what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to shed a different light on his character. He's cartoonishly portrayed, almost in the West, So I'm trying to, shed a different light on his
there's a word, cartoonish. The mass murder of workers, secretaries, clerks at the Charlie Hebdo office in Paris, was that terrorism or not?
Obviously, that was terrorism.
And was it carried out by followers of Bin Laden and Al Qaeda? Yes or no?
It was carried out by Bin Laden and Al Qaeda, but the point of my discussion is that I'm explaining his motives. I'm explaining as to why he did what he did.
You're really not explaining it very well, Imran. I'm sorry to tell you. You haven't explained why it's war to kill black African cigarette sellers outside the American embassy in Dar es Salaam or in Nairobi. You haven't explained why it's war to kill a young woman on her way to work on a London bus. You haven't explained why it is war to murder the secretary as she came out for her lunch from the Charlie Hebdo office. You haven't explained any of that.
Well, if you allow me to, I'll actually try to try to do my best to
Well,
give
your
a different
best
perspective
isn't good enough. So I suggest to you that you retreat now, that you reflect on what you've said, that you reflect on the weakness of your arguments, that you think, and that you call me back on another occasion, hopefully to withdraw the things that you have said. Nikolai is in Denmark. Let's hear from Nikolai.
Yes, hello, George. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. Thank you.
Well, George, let me commend you for a very good show and for conveying a message that the mainstream media usually doesn't. So,
thank you.
I have no idea if I'm alone from Denmark or somebody else is watching from Denmark, but in Scandinavia, we have also participated, or at least our countries have participated, under the U.S. umbrella, Afghanistan, all that, and so on. Not a good story.
No.
Let's put that aside. George Galloway, your hat, your eyepieces, your beard, your suit, arms around the labs, it's an icon for free speech. Make a trademark of that.
How very, very kind of you.
Having said that, I have a question to you. While Macron is eating a croissant with cheese and having a glass of wine, weeping over the U.S. and the Australian deal, zooming out, it's all about U.S. and China, right?
It is. We're going to have to continue this conversation, Nikolai. I like you. You're not alone in Denmark. We have many viewers and listeners in Denmark, many correspondents from Denmark too. But we've run out of time in the second hour and we've got to go to the news. But your description of Macron eating his croissant with cheese, drinking his glass of wine, his tears dropping into that wine is something that is iconic for me. So I'll be back right after the news with Jamie Lowe, which comes up now.
Radio Sputnik News.
The new security arrangement between Britain and the United States to supply nuclear submarines to Australia will make the world safer and could create hundreds of new jobs, the new British Foreign Secretary has claimed. Liz Truss said it showed the UK's readiness to be hard-handed in defending its interests. But France, whose own submarine deal with Australia was thwarted as a result, has criticised the agreement. It has recalled its ambassadors in the US and Australia for consultation in response, while China has accused the three powers of having a Cold War mentality. The alliance, called AUKUS, widely seen as an effort to counter China's influence in the contested South China Sea, was announced by US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison on Wednesday. France's foreign minister has accused Australia and the US of lying over the deal. Speaking yesterday, Jean-Yves Le Drian said a serious crisis was in progress between the allies. The fact that for the first time in the history of relations between the United States and France, we are recalling our ambassador for consultations is a serious political act which shows the magnitude of the crisis that exists now between the countries, he said. But he said France had seen no need to recall its ambassador to the UK, accusing the country of constant opportunism. China's President Xi Jinping is yet to commit to attending this year's climate change summit in Glasgow. COP26 President Alok Sharma has admitted earlier this month. Sharma held 2 days of talks in China ahead of the international summit being hosted by the UK in Glasgow in November. But asked today if Xi had committed to being in Scotland for the gathering of world leaders, Sharma said no, not yet. He also admitted that China would be key to the climate change talks as the country is one of the world's biggest polluters. Philippine boxing star Manny Pacquiao says he will run for president in next year's election. He was nominated as a candidate by a faction of the ruling party PDP Laban. On top of a glittering career as a fighter and world champion, Pacquiao, 42, is a senator in the Philippines parliament. Incumbent Rodrigo Duterte is barred from another term but has been picked by a rival party faction to run for vice president, a move critics say is an attempt to cling onto power. US officials have moved thousands of migrants away from a Texas border town that has seen an influx of mostly Haitian migrants over the past week. More than 10,000 people had gathered under a bridge connecting Del Rio in Texas to Mexico's Ciudad Acuña. Local officials have struggled to provide them with food and adequate sanitation. Some 2,000 people were moved to immigration and processing stations on Friday. The US government says it plans to fly the migrants back to where they began their journeys. Flights are expected to start today. 4 amateur astronauts have splashed down successfully in the Atlantic Ocean after 3 days in space. They are the first private or civilian team ever to orbit the Earth. The Inspiration 4 crew left on a SpaceX capsule from Florida on Wednesday and landed off the state's coast after 7 p.m. local time on Saturday. The Inspiration 4 team was led by Jared Isaacman, 38, chief executive of the e-commerce firm Shift4 Payments Inc., who acted as mission commander. He paid an undisclosed sum estimated by Time magazine to be about $200 million to fellow billionaire Elon Musk for 4 seats aboard the Crew Dragon. President Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party is expected to easily beat the 13 other parties taking part in the Russian parliamentary and local elections. Polls opened on Friday and closed at 8 p.m. today. The former England football striker and Tottenham's record goalscorer Jimmy Greaves has died at the age of 81. Greaves began his career with Chelsea before spells at AC Milan, Spurs and West Ham. He scored 44 goals in 57 games for England and was a member of the 1966 World Cup winning squad, although he did not play in the final. He holds the record for the most goals in the English top flight with 357 and scored 266 in 379 matches for Tottenham. Greaves' 41 goals in 1960 to 1961 remains a record in a season for Chelsea, and he also holds the Spurs record with 37 between 1962 and 63. And finally, it's the incredible shrinking country. The Netherlands has long been the world's tallest nation, but its people are getting shorter, according to Dutch researchers. Although height has increased over the last 100 years, the study showed that Dutch men born in 2001 were 1 centimetre, almost half an inch, shorter than their 1980 counterparts. For women, the difference was more pronounced, with a difference of 1.4 centimetres. The 1980 generation were the tallest ever, benefiting from a huge height increase. Men born in 1980 stood at an average height of 6 feet and were over 3 inches taller than those born in 1930. Women born in 1980 were also significantly taller at 5.6 feet, 2 inches taller than those born in 1930. The study by Statistics Netherlands, the Municipal Health Service and the National Institute for Public Health surveyed 719,000 Dutch-born individuals between the ages of 19 and 60 who self-reported their height and used an average height at age 19 as the benchmark. The reason for the height decrease is partly related to increased levels of immigration from shorter population groups, according to researchers. However, growth also tapered off for individuals whose parents were born in the Netherlands, and for those whose 4 grandparents were all Dutch-born. Previous studies suggested it could be due to an increased focus on plant-based diets and environmental factors. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Some weird and wonderful calls coming in with all kinds of theses being advanced. There were no planes on 9/11. We all imagined what we saw live on television. The second poll has been launched. I think it's a good one. What did Joey Biden think the name of Australia's Prime Minister was? A, the fella down under. B, Cobber. C, Rolf Harris. Rolf Harris. You may laugh, but when you call the Prime Minister of a sovereign country the fella down under, pal, you're really asking for it. So what did he think the name was? Fella down under, Cobber, or Rolf Harris? I wish I could do an Australian accent, but I cannot. King says, Starmer is so wooden, he washes his hair with Pledge. For American viewers and listeners, Pledge is a furniture polish. Baba Black Sheep says Mandelson is a bona fide traitor. Neil Curry says Tony Blair identified as the Middle East peace envoy. Crowhawk says I don't care what people call themselves, but if I'm buying a dog and it has a pair of testicles hanging out the back, no amount of special pleading or hurt feelings is going to convince me it's a bitch. Paul Hammond says it's not a Cold War. Sorry, it's a Cold War, not a hot war. Years and years of anti-communism to allow free market capitalism more power. And Chika Boom Boom says France needed that deal for their economic survival, and the US double-crossed them. He did a heart of stone not to laugh. Greg says McAfee, Epstein, Anthony Bourdain all died from autoerotic asphyxiation. Greg knows because he was there. Frank Walker says the security agencies of all countries are just as evil as each other. There is no good or bad. Alexandros says our troops are not heroes. They are only heroes if they stand up against imperialism, be that overseas or by their own government. And Piers Morgan, not the Piers Morgan, says Australia is miles away from the South China Sea. If this pact is about opposing Chinese aggression in said sea, why aren't any countries in the area joining the pact? That is the smartest thing you've said, Piers Morgan, in a very, very long time. So get voting. What did Joe Biden think the name of Australia's PM was? You can vote on my YouTube, on my Telegram channel, and on my Twitter. The coolest of cats is American correspondent Garland Nixon. Boy, have I got things to talk to him about. Garland, it's so wonderful to have you back on the show. You're looking magnificent as always. Let's start with the AUKUS. It's caused such a ruckus. Do the American people even know that they have mortally offended France? And they've now got here today, gone tomorrow, Australian Prime Minister whose name the United States President can't remember and who may be out of office next year. Do they know or care?
I would argue the answer would be no to both questions. You know, having traveled around the world a bit, I see that the American people, particularly the current crop of Americans that we have, the current electorate that we have, is concerned with the problems that they have here and are less than knowledgeable about international affairs, particularly when our media does everything they can to mislead them. So I would argue that most Americans are, you know, they're caught up in chasing some kind of carrot that they'll never get, and which at this time in America, the argument that the Democrats are actually going to reduce taxes on the rich is out there for people to chase for a while until it fades, as it generally does. So Americans really don't know much about that, and it's not a huge, believe it or not, it's not a big story in the mainstream media as it should be.
Well, CNN, which used to pride itself on being the breaking news story, did not report for 3 whole hours that France had withdrawn its ambassador to the United States, something that I think has never happened before, and something that might have been thought newsworthy. They did, after all, send you the Statue de Liberté.
Well, the thing I think this is a valuable lesson for France. What France is learning now, they should have long known, and that is that the United States empire is stringently hierarchical, both inside and outside of the empire. So the empire's alliances, and I use that word guardedly, alliances of vassal states and hangers-on, also have a very hierarchical nature. And the countries that are English-speaking go to the front of the line. And France doesn't speak English. They are not at the front of the line. I also suspect, believe it or not, I suspect that Australia may have been looking at their financial balance sheets and might have been looking for a way out of that very expensive a deal that they have with France over submarines over the long term, and realize that, I mean, the deal with the U.S. is utopian. I don't see how a country of 25 million can have the resources necessary to purchase and maintain a fleet of 8 nuclear submarines. So in the long run, 5 or 6 years, I think this thing fades into history anyway, and it never comes to fruition.
I have a feeling that's how the Chinese look at it, too. I'm much more exercised by it than it seems China is. But if it were to happen, it has potentially life extinction as its end course. Why is Biden so maniacal about China? I thought Donald Trump could not be outdone in his anti-China madness. But I think Biden is toe-to-toe with Trump in this madness.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, I've even seen Biden, to some extent, I would argue, kind of take it to a higher level. And I think it's because Biden really represents the empire, and the empire wants to be hegemonic. They want to run the world, and doggone if those Chinese aren't taking the position that they have a right to bring their people out of poverty and to advance their economic interest around the world, thereby giving some of the developing countries an option other than the United States for economic improvement. And I think there's basically what you're looking at is a panicked empire who doesn't know how to deal with China. I mean, and let me add this. If you think of it, even if they give the submarines to Australia, how does that change the balance of power? What does that really do? It puts some money in the pockets of some U.S. War profiteers in the unlikely event that it comes to fruition. So I think the U.S. foreign policy is kind of like a drowning man who's just reaching in every direction, trying to grab anything to hold on to pull himself up. And this is just another example of that.
Mind you, some Democrats are going out on a limb. At the Met Gala, tickets $30,000. AOC, the great hope of liberals and progressives in America, struck a blow for class struggle by having the train of her dress carried in by a masked servant. She looked rather stunning in it, I must say. Even before I read the words on the dress in lipstick, tax the rich, did that send US capitalism scurrying for the bunker?
No, I suspect that they laughed and, sat back and had another drink and felt good about it. I mean, think about this. AOC comes into Congress and says, I'm going to fight the system. And then she basically acquiesces to everything that the hardcore capitalists and the neocons want. Now, take her career since she's gone into Congress, and then compare that to Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard came in and basically stood up against the empire and said, we need to end the Cold War. We need to end these wars. We need to use the money for people. They ran her out of Congress. She's out now. So I would argue that if you come into Congress and you truly try to fight the system, another guy, Will Hurd, a Republican from Texas, he, really tried to fight the system. He's out the door. If AOC was truly trying to fight the system, they would have ran her out of office. Once you join the criminal enterprise that is the U.S. empire, once you join that criminal enterprise, there's only two options. You go along with their worldwide, move for hegemony, or you're going to be out the door. Tulsi Gabbard's out the door. AOC is still there, which means she supports the empire.
Well, it got tremendous publicity over here and on social media. How did it play in Peoria?
Well, basically, it is what AOC has become. And this is not to praise or to put down AOC. She has become a pop culture figure. So the things that AOC does, the moves that she makes would be like, when we're looking at what the Kardashians did, when we're looking at, when Michael Jackson was alive, or Britney Spears, if she was out there doing something. It falls into that category. I don't think AOC's actions even fall into a political category anymore, because she's not taking on the powers that be politically. She's drifting along with that. And every now and then she'll do something cute and people will clap and say, wow, did you see that?
In California, the recall petition failed, comprehensively failed. Is that a big boost for centrist Democrats?
They will argue that it's a big boost, but I would argue, really? You won in California and you're arguing that that gives you some kind of a mandate and for your policies? Now, had you lost or come close to losing in California, that would be a major political, that would be a political earthquake. But the fact that you won in California, I mean, it would be like the Republicans winning in Mississippi. That is, you are on your home end of the field. There's no way in the world that they shouldn't win in a blowout. So I would make the argument, certainly they're going to argue it's some kind of mandate. You won on your home field in a blowout. You should have won on your home field in a blowout. So politically, it really means nothing.
And Donald Trump, he seems definitely to be running to me. What's your take on that?
I think Donald Trump's running. It's interesting. I think that the Democratic Party is thinking very, very short term right now, whether it's with the vaccine mandates. They think that's going to help. But I would argue this. They're popular with some, but within a year, 1 to 2 years, when we get closer to the election, people are going to look at some of the more dramatic policy changes that have been made under the Biden administration and evaluate whether or not they have been successful. So I think there were some polls out recently that showed that Donald Trump would beat Joe Biden. We have a long time. Will it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Or will it be Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? In which instance, I think it's a cakewalk for Donald Trump if he faces off with Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I think the same. And it's inconceivable to me that Joe Biden will be on the ballot in 2024. I think all joking aside, the scene, the farce of the US president calling a landmark live news event and then forgetting the name of the sovereign prime minister on his right, calling him the fella down under, the idea that he's still going to be compos mentis in 2024 to be a remotely credible presidential candidate is fanciful to me. So I expect Kamala Harris to succeed him as president probably rather soon.
Yes, and I mean, going into 2024, if you look at what Donald Trump had to go against, and again, I'm not a Trump, I'm an independent, I'm not for either of them, but because of the pandemic, the Democrats were able to hide Joe Biden in the basement. They were able to cancel debates. They were able to hide him as much as possible because it was in the early stages of the pandemic. Going into 2020, that was in 2020. Going into 2024, they won't be able to hide him if he is in fact still the president. He'll have to be out there and go toe to toe with Donald Trump, and he will not fare well. And as for Kamala Harris, her political skills are very weak. I mean, just as a candidate for any office, we can see how poorly she did in the primary. So to put Kamala Harris out there, to me, they might as well look for give her a white flag. That should be, a bumper sticker with a white flag would be an appropriate thing for Kamala Harris to run with.
Garland Nixon, as always, totally fascinating, blistering. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Reju is in Leicester on China. Let's hear from him or her. Reju.
Roger.
Well, it's written here R-E-J-U, so somebody's getting fired in that box.
Never mind. Fire him. No, George.
Go on, Roger.
Please go easy on me. I heard your opening remarks at the beginning of the programme. It was like standing out behind a jet engine on full throttle.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I think it's a pretty good thing to wake you up.
Thank
anyway, no, it's always a good thing to talk with you, George. What I want to talk about, obviously, is the submarines. And regardless of whether you think there should be a pact or shouldn't be a pact, what I really think is why they couldn't include France.
Well, that is the mystery. That is a real mystery, isn't it?
Well, it isn't, George. I don't think it's a mystery at all.
Tell me.
Because we came out, like you wanted us to, like I wanted us to come out and Brexit. And, of course, we came out, and the reason you and I didn't want to be in that terrible regime is because of lack of democracy. And we don't want to be a mini World Economic Forum. We don't want to be part of that. And that is exactly why France could not be part of this regime or this setup, a tripartite setup. The fact is also, and they weren't stabbed in the back, actually, because they were, according to Australian people who are speaking, including the Prime Minister, he said he had meetings before and discussed the future of the submarine deal.
Well, he would say that, wouldn't he?
Well, yeah, but, so would Macron.
No, but he's facing a lawsuit for breach of contract worth tens of billions of euros.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. But the point is...
why couldn't... France is in NATO. France is a nuclear power in NATO. One of only three. It is a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations. It is a historic ally of the United States. Why couldn't they have just cut them in on a bit of the deal?
Simply because when we left Europe, first person to cancel all sharing of intelligence, the first person or country that Macron said could not participate in any shared developments along those lines.
I get that, Roger, and I'm with you.
And if we're sharing with France, we can't share with France.
Well, I get that. But you're not suggesting, are you, that it was Britain that made the decision to exclude France?
No, I'm not saying that at all.
It was the United States that made the decision to
Of course it
exclude
would
France.
be.
So why
Of
did the
course it
US?
would be.
Why did the US do it? It's got nothing to
For
do with the
same
EU.
reason, it's everything to do with the EU, because they are making overtures. In fact, more than making
But Joe
overtures
Biden loves
to
the
Russia.
EU. Roger, Joe Biden
Listen.
loves the EU. It's Britain that he hates.
Well, it's no longer that way, is it?
I heard the horse.
Simply because-
I heard the horse laugh in Leicestershire. Thanks for the call, Rog. Anytime. Graham is in Norfolk. He likes the EU. Let's hear from him.
Hello there, George. How's it going, mate?
All right, Graham. Tell me.
I watch all your stuff, man.
Good.
Watch you on Cali Mahora and everything.
Excellent.
I agree with you in just about everything. In fact, everything apart from Europe. I would like to get back into Europe. I don't want to see Scotland like so becoming a separate country. But I think Europe's an important thing to like to stick with. I mean, you've got like so your
It's
Eastern
not working
European
that well now, Graham, is it?
No, it's a bit of a mess. I mean, like, so Greece is like, so what, being held in debt slavery by the Troika and stuff like that. But I don't know how Europe's going to turn out. Well, we've got Nord Stream 2 coming in from Russia. We've got, like, so what, Greece, where the actual ports are owned by China, at least one of them anyway. So the BRI's coming through on the east. I think it's good that we've got Russia and China, and we need closer ties with these two countries, and we need to keep the European Union alive.
Well, that's beyond us now, and I don't think anyone could keep it alive, but the French people may very well leave, the Dutch people may very well leave, the Italian people may very well leave. Its days are numbered, Graham, and in any case, we already decided to leave. So what's your strategy for getting back in?
Well, that I don't know. It just pains me. I mean, like, so on everything I've got the European Union flag, and it's in red instead of blue. I think we've got so many comrades in Europe that I don't want to turn our back on them.
Well, you need to make a few more here in Britain, Graham, because we ain't going back in, no matter how many red EU flags you wave. It's been a pleasure disagreeing with you. Now, Khalid says, well said, George, about the male-to-female transgender issue. It defies science and morality alike. It's not acceptable in a logical sense. Now, my question is, do you think Iran's Persian fascism and its Shia militias swallowing of Arabic Iraq is coming to an end over the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, like witnessing a sort of uprising of Iraqi nationalists against the Iranian lawlessness caused by the US? Single-handedly, Iraq was handed on a silver platter from 2003. On the submarine issue, so you believe we're living a new Protestant Anglo-Saxon alliance to defeat China. Much love and respect to you, my big brother, Khalid in Spain. A mixed bag, that, Khalid. I would call it a new white Anglo-Saxon Protestant alliance, but Joe Biden is nominally at least a Roman Catholic. George, please get Glenn Greenwald on the show. The closest thing America has to you. I'm not sure if he'll value that, but I would love to have Glenn Greenwald on the show. I follow and retweet and agree with a very great deal of what he has to say. Did you hear that next door? Try and get Glenn on the show. Derek says, I'm told we've tried before and he's declined. Let's try now. He and I are getting on a bit better now than we did before. Derek says, what an opening monologue tonight. You were on fire. That's one for the archives. Maybe your favourite team should score every week in the final minutes. You got it. I was very, very happy tonight when I came in. On the British Labour Party and its infatuation with gender politics, maybe all the male MPs in Labour should self-identify as women. They may yet. So that the entire opposition becomes female and Labour would have its first female leader. Just a thought. Derek. You know, Derek, that's a thought that might come to pass. That would be quite a stroke, wouldn't it? The entire Labour front bench self-identified as women. George, here in California with my Glaswegian husband. Lucky you, ma'am. It's driving me a bit mad that Americans are sounding off on social media about the setbacks women are having under Taliban rule. Yet here we are experiencing our own debilitating setbacks on women's rights in Texas, with many other states poised to follow their lead. Not to mention the horrible war against our fight for voting rights. Where is the rage against our leadership on these issues? We need to clean up our own backyard. The United States should be a lighthouse shining its beacon into the darkness. Or as Ronald Reagan put it, 1,000 point... No, it wasn't Ronald Reagan, it was George W. Bush. No, it was the father. It was George Bush Sr. I think he said that America was 1,000 points of light, a shining city on a hill, I think Ronald Reagan called it. Best wishes, Patrice Daly. If you want, I'll speak on the phone. Do speak on the phone. P.S. Your show has taken over our living room every Sunday. I'm so happy to hear that. And best wishes to both of you and your Glaswegian husband. Has he still got the accent? James says, hello, keep up the excellent work I watch every week. Jim in Michigan City, Indiana. How wonderful, I must say. Let's take a call from Julio. Me and Julio down by the schoolyard, but he's in Toronto. Go ahead, Julio.
Hello, George. How are you?
I'm good. I'm following the Canadian elections closely.
Such an honor to hear your voice. I just remember back in 2009, the ultra-right pro-apartheid Israel regime of Harper banned you from entering Canada.
They did. That's why I'm following it, because I was briefly banned from Canada. I was a sitting member of Parliament, the mother of parliaments, and the government of Harper banned me as a terrorist. As a terrorist. Now, luckily, the court overturned the ban and gave a judicial caning to Jason Kenney, the Interior Minister who issued the ban. So I did win. It was quite profitable, really. But it was momentarily discomforting, Julio.
Yes, it was. I just wanted to know your take on tomorrow's election.
Well, I did a piece on Sputnik about it last week with our North American correspondent, Alex Mihailovich. It's worth looking at that. But the situation is rather similar to Theresa May in Britain. Trudeau has called an election he had absolutely no need to call, hoping that he'd get an increased majority and might well lose the majority that he had. I don't know whether to laugh or cry about that, Julio.
Yeah, well, as you know, the candidates have been endorsed by politicians in the U.S. Jack Nixon, the NDP leader, got an endorsement from Bernie Sanders down south. Erin O'Toole got an endorsement from Conrad Black, the convicted felon. I know if you heard.
That must be a poison chalice, surely.
Yes. And so, you know...
if I had a vote, I'd vote for the NDP, for Singh. Not because I think their positions are correct. Many of their positions are actually very wrong. But as one of the three mainstream runners, he's the one that I'd vote for, Julio.
Yeah. Well, as you know, the foreign policy is written on the hallways of Washington. So much so that everybody criticizes the BBC, but our national CBC has turned into BBC nowadays.
Or worse even than the BBC. Well, good luck tomorrow, Julio. We'll review it when it's all over. next Sunday. Last question of the evening. In 1967, the cruise liner Queen Elizabeth II was launched. On what river did that take place? A, the Clyde, B, the Tyne, C, the Tees. Answer after the break.
Radio Sputnik.
Now let me give you the phone numbers. If you're in the UK, the number is 08081 96 5522. It's entirely free nowadays. Ditto if you're in the United States. +1 844 944 3344.
They're looking up to the wrong role models, and that's what's causing them to get into gang culture and look up to folk that are stabbing and shooting each other.
That's why I love that picture on the front of The Voice of Sancho, of Sterling, of Saka, and of Rashford. I loved it because it showed young black boys, this is what you should aspire to.
Better than every other country.
Well, we are better than every other country.
Look in the mirror.
No, we
you're
are.
Not treated,
Well, tell me a country that's better.
Yeah, but that means nothing to me.
Well, it may not. It's a fair point.
That means nothing to me and my children. At the end of the day, that is a white man's problem, a white woman's problem. It's about time you stop ignoring it and denying it and deal with it. You're causing a lot of harm.
I'm causing a lot of harm. Thank you for that call.
But
I'm sympathetic, Kieran, to that point of view, and I'm fully seized of the fact that there is sexual fluidity openly expressed now in a way that there wasn't when I was young, and I have no animus towards even people that like sex with pans. I just won't allow my 4-year-old. Or my 7-year-old or my 10-year-old to be filled with this at school.
That is a straw man. You show me a single teacher that can teach a 4-year-old child about sex. If you can show me that, I will ring the police before you.
Well, you may not be aware.
Prove me.
Kieran, you may not be aware. Kieran, let me speak. You may not be aware of the story that broke this week. Kieran, please be quiet for a minute.
Moats is the best. Keep going, George. It's the only way.
God bless you. No, as long as I've got breath, I'll keep going.
Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Well, the Queen Elizabeth II was actually launched on the River Clyde. Some fools think there is no River Tees, which was the option C, but in fact, it runs from Hartlepool to Darlington through the Pennines, an area of outstanding natural beauty. I only know that because my very clever young friend, my apprentice in many ways, James Giles, has joined me and was able to enlighten me. But it was in fact launched on the Clyde. Nothing will stop reunification of Taiwan, Alex in Edinburgh says. I think he's referring to a Channel 4 interview. I don't know with whom. David said, another brilliant monologue, George. It's so frightening to think that our recent political leaders have become such lackeys that we would follow the US through the gates of hell. And the Deptford variant says that France's retaliation will be to increase the price of camembert. We'll talk, James, about French retaliation, but first I want to talk about the great reshuffle. For many in the world, they will have not even noticed Did the British people notice? Was it of any consequence?
Well, I really don't think it was. I mean, Boris Johnson is clearly saying we're halfway through the administration, there's an election coming round not too far away from now, probably 2023, instead of stringing it along to 2024. But when the opposition are just so weak, so ineffective, actually, does it really matter who are the cabinet ministers in government? I couldn't tell you the name of the shadow Home Secretary for Labour, one of the great offices of state. And so,
I couldn't either, actually.
Well, quite.
And I was a Labour MP for a very long time.
Almost 30 years,
yeah.
Exactly. And so, you know, as a result, you've got Boris Johnson putting his own lackeys into government.
Is that what it's about, a changing of the lackeys?
Yeah, that's essentially it. You know,
in which case, who was the loser?
Well, the losers were Raab, of course, over his handling of Afghanistan. He's got a demotion now to Justice Secretary.
Yes, I'm surprised he accepted it.
Yes, so am I. But, you know, he managed to wangle the title of Deputy Prime Minister out of Johnson as well.
Which gets you a job with Facebook.
Well, it will
when
do,
you
in due
leave
course.
Parliament.
Well, exactly.
As Nick Clegg found out, you get a very, very nice job in California. Although I'm not sure Dominic Raab is a man for California, though he was on a pedalo, not even a deck chair, when Kabul fell. Bad luck, that.
It's very bad luck. And instead you find people like Nadine Dorries promoted to Culture Secretary.
Now, she's one of the least cultured people I've ever met.
Well, indeed,
So she's ideal for the culture sector.
She's absolutely ideal for the job. She's known, I think, for eating a camel's toe and an ostrich's anus on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here.
A camel's toe.
And
we better not go down that.
No, indeed. But that's what she's very well known for, of course. She got suspended from the Tory party for a time for going down under and appearing on this show.
James, this is becoming X-certificate going down under on camel's toes.
Well, hang on a moment here. She's got no interest in theatre or culture whatsoever, it would seem. And of course, her record on gay rights is voting against same-sex marriage and actually having a pretty anti-LGBT record. So it's just as well that there are definitely no gays in the performing arts sector, because that makes her ideally placed, of course, to be the culture secretary. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
But she's there because she's been loyal to Johnson throughout, and as a result, she gets a promotion. People like Liz Truss, who very quietly have been getting on with the job, get promotion.
She's the new Foreign Secretary. Now, that's interesting. I hadn't backed her. My money's on Penny Mordaunt. Good odds, too. But she didn't go anywhere in the reshuffle. Liz Truss was preferred. She's now Britain's first Conservative woman Foreign Secretary. What can you tell us about her?
Well, Liz Truss is MP for a very safe seat. She was part of David Cameron's initial A-list of candidates, so people who had been donors to the party, real strong, shining lights of the future. Cameron put them in plum, safe seats to make sure they'd be there for life. She's very quietly and very effectively got on with the job at the Department for International Trade of making these trade deals. And so as a result, she's really popular among the Tory grassroots, which in my view is the reason why Boris Johnson put her out to be Foreign Secretary, because it means she'll be travelling the world, won't have quite as much time to wine and dine with the Tory grassroots, Tory members. Let us not forget, Theresa May made Boris Johnson her Foreign Secretary, in part to get him out of the limelight, out of the way, but look how well that ended for her. So, Liz Truss could still emerge as a future leader.
As a future leader. I've not actually ever heard her speak, but she gets a good press.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, she's loved by the Tory membership for her role in creating what we have now in a post-Brexit Britain. She has been around the world negotiating trade deals, which makes her quite well placed to be Foreign Secretary. She's built a rapport with these people. Unlike Joe Biden, she can remember the name of foreign leaders, which is always a plus.
Well, 30% of our respondents think that Joe Biden thought that the name of Australia's Prime Minister was Rolf Harris. I mean, 64% said that he thought his name was the fella down under. which is a very great tune, actually. Men at Work. I encourage people to listen to it. We used it in our Tony Blair film. 7% thought his name was Cobber, which in a way he did because he called him Pal, and Cobber is Australian for pal. But 29% think he thought that the Australian PM was Rolf Harris. Now, you're about to find out who the Shadow Home Secretary is, if you can stay awake.
Sure.
Because the Labour conference is upon us. What's your take on that?
Well, the Labour conference really is the showcase for a party at war. Starmer has lurched over to very much the Blairite ring of the party.
The dark side.
Yeah, the dark side, as it were. And he has installed David Evans as his General Secretary. David Evans has been imposing fire and rehire policies amongst Labour Party staff. Heaven forbid a Labour Party doing the things they despise those in the private sector doing. And so it's looking like David Evans won't actually get to keep the job. So the unions have withdrawn their support and they're subject to a vote at conference of ratification. So that could be a real blow to Starmer's leadership. Other CLPs have submitted motions to the Labour Party conference calling on disciplinaries from the Parliamentary Labour Party to be heard and voted on at conference. One imagines that's a move to try and get Jeremy Corbyn reinstated as a Labour MP, because obviously he was readmitted to the party but still sits as an independent. You've also then got the woke element of the Labour Party putting forward motions. One such motion, which actually wouldn't be legally compliant if it was adopted, is to guarantee that at least a third of all Labour Council candidates would be black or minority ethnic, which is, of course, against the very principles of the equality.
The SNP did that in the Scottish elections.
They did indeed. But unlike the SNP, who just so happened to do that, Labour want to make it a binding policy in their constitution that you have to do that. So you've got the Blairites fighting to remove the Corbyns, the Len McCluskeys of this world from the party. You've got those on the left trying to maintain some level of relevance, trying to say we're still here, still banging the drum. You've got
although it's a small achievement in life to stop somebody called David Evans becoming the General Secretary of the Labour Party.
Well,
what does it matter if he's replaced on a week Monday by someone called Robert Evans, of whom you're equally oblivious, and who follow exactly the same policies?
Well, Robert Evans is a Blairite county councillor in Surrey, so it could well be Robert Evans.
I knew that you would know that, because you know everything. Thank you, James. Stay in your place, because we might get your comments on some of the calls. Let's hear from Paul in London. Can we do that? Paul in London? Go ahead, Paul.
Cheers. Thank you. By the way, what a game that was today.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, such drama and such romance. Jesse Lingard's goal will live long, and David De Gea's very rare penalty save, perhaps even longer.
Exactly. Absolutely insane. Quickly on the vaccine passports. I think that's, I'm not, my views on policy are a bit funny, but I think they're a monstrosity. But what I find more bizarre is that you've got people who, if there's a sort of, I don't really realise, if you justify vaccine passports, they don't just apply to nightclubs. They could apply to all sorts of things. And some of the people who are most defensive of these vaccine passports will be very they'll be very, what's the word? Sort of liberals who have these issues on sort of protecting refugees and stuff like that. They don't seem to realise that could easily affect them as well in a very negative way, but they're some of the most keenest advocates of it.
We live in if you'll forgive the pun, a cross-dressing world. The Liberals are the most authoritarian on issues like COVID, vaccine passports, masks, and so on. If you're going to be screamed at in the street for not wearing a mask, it's quite likely that someone that defines themselves as liberal that will be doing it.
And what I find bizarre, some of these people seem to think that if you have a sort of situation where if you need a vaccine passport to go into a nightclub, why should you not need it to enter the country? For example, why should you not need it to enter the country? Why should you not need it to access the NHS? But I wouldn't support this sort of view.
These are people that, for some reason, are ready to die on the hill against voter ID. They don't want a person turning up at the ballot box to be asked to identify themselves as actually being a legitimate voter in that election, but they want people to have a vaccine passport. You're right. It's a double-edged sword, Paul.
You know, that's it. It's just something that's been bothering me. I've just been seeing people just supporting. I've seen Blair was banging the drum on it this morning.
Yeah.
And I just thought,
well, that is the clinching argument for me, James. Thanks for that, Paul. When Tony Blair becomes the standard bearer for something, something in my mind tells me that's not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't possibly think why, but Tony Blair does seem to give the kiss of death to any policy that he puts his endorsement to.
Well, he's killed a lot of people.
Well, indeed. He seems for now to have killed off the idea of vaccine passports, but you've got a Conservative government that even now really can't make up their mind. They've got a huge backbench opposition to the concept. So in one breath, Sajid Javid is saying, no, absolutely not. It's not where we're going. We're not about that. And in the next breath, they're saying, well, give it a couple of weeks, couple of months, and we might still need to do it.
We might have to do it. Did you see that Michael Gove says that he suspects that Dominic Cummings, once as close to him as you and I are, may be suffering from mental illness?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Dominic Cummings was suffering from some form of mental illness. I mean, some of the things he's been saying recently on Twitter have become ever more outlandish, ever more attention-seeking. And the one that really raised my eyebrows was Dominic Cummings saying he was thinking of starting an OnlyFans account. Now, that website is used for things that definitely isn't political argument and political discourse.
Kangaroo anuses and,
yes, and camel toes.
And so on. Let's take Ian in Hounslow. Go ahead, Ian.
Hello, George.
Hi.
I was listening to Mr. Seddon earlier, and he touched on something where the elites are using the TG issue, the transgender issue, and others to end talk of class struggle and keep power and wealth concentrated in their hands.
Mm. Do you really think that, Ian? I mean, that would be a successful conspiracy if that theory was right. But isn't it just that so many people on the left are stark raving bonkers?
Well, they're not the left, are they?
No,
they're
they call themselves.
Elites.
They call themselves
the left.
No, they're not really. If you go to any Jeremy Corbyn rally, you'll find an astoundingly high number of the people at that rally identify with these policies. I'm sorry, it's not the elites.
Well, I've been to these meetings that you talk about, George. Compared to me, they're the elites. They wear fancy clothes, expensive clothes.
I wish.
Luggage, etc. And I found myself out of place being as a working class Marxist. I did not fit in with that environment.
Well, I know exactly how you feel. Luckily, I'm not invited to any of these events anymore. Even the 20th anniversary of the Stop the War Coalition, of which I was a founder, and for 20 years, I thought, the vice president. I'm not invited to speak, which is quite a relief as well as an insult.
But George, one final thing.
Yeah.
The demons that these people are summoning up are, quite frankly, terrifying in the form of fascism. You're in a mixed marriage. I was. I have a gay brother. I have Asian friends and neighbours. We all be caught up in the maelstrom, stirred up by this lot, while they're locked up in their gated estates. That's what I'm afraid of.
Well, I'm afraid of that too. I think to an extent that's already happened. You were in a mixed marriage. I've been in more than one. I have 5 mixed race children, but I'm routinely denounced as a racist. So we are in dystopian times, Ian.
Well, I don't know. All I want to do is stop these people lying, putting out this propaganda, turning neighbour against neighbour.
I'm with you on that. I agree, and I agree with you that they're not the left, but they think they're the left. They are thought by the public to be the left, and therein lies the problem. Ian, as always,
Exactly.
great to talk to you. There is a lot of strangeness about in politics in Britain, isn't there?
There certainly is. I mean, there's been a complete redefining of what being left and being right is.
Yeah.
You know, I never thought I'd see the day when you had Labour campaigning against raising taxes and a Conservative Party in government
That
saying,
happened.
let's raise them. That it's the highest level since the war.
Some people watching and listening to this may not know it, but that happened last week.
Absolutely. And that, to me, epitomises the current political situation. You've got working class people that should be Labour voters voting Conservative. You've got people who would be Labour voters, Conservative voters now voting for Labour. And actually, politics in Britain has just become a weird mishmash of everything. You know, Liberals have taken over the Labour Party,
They've also taken over the Conservative Party.
Well, indeed.
We've actually got liberal hegemony.
Absolutely.
Small L liberal.
Yes, for sure.
The actual liberals with a capital L, they're a joke. But why would you need them?
Well, quite.
You've got liberals running Labour and liberals running the Conservative.
Indeed. Well, you're saying two cheeks of the same arse has never been more true in British
Yeah, except
politics.
it's morphed into one cheek.
Indeed.
Did I see Norma on the screen? Norma, whose 60th wedding anniversary we celebrated last week, and she came up on the screen, but she has disappeared from it. The phone system has died. We've been crashed. We've been crashed by the elites to deprive us of this wonderful call that we always get from Norma. The whole country likes to hear from her. Is she there?
Well, I had the pleasure of speaking to Norma on the phone earlier.
And we've now seen her picture on Twitter.
We have indeed.
They say never meet your heroes, but now we've at least seen her.
Exactly. And she got her DVD, her Killing Kelly DVD.
She got her Killing Kelly DVD. And by the way, the Killing Kelly DVD is now going like hotcakes because it's on Amazon, right?
It is indeed. It's on Amazon Prime. So if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can buy the DVD with free next day delivery, all tracked. And that's at a cost of £12.99. And if you want a signed copy, you can also get one of those, obviously, on your online shop, georgegalloway.shop.
My hand's tired, actually.
I'm sure.
Signing them. Norma, clear the decks. Norma, the legend, has got 60 seconds. Go ahead, Norma.
Oh, honestly, my phone went funny. I got your Killing Kelly.
Yeah.
And it was very disturbing.
It is.
And it was my confidence and my trust is at such a low point,
Yeah. It wasn't the best thing to send you for your diamond wedding.
No, but that's over now, George. Yeah, thank you very much.
We all loved your snaps online. Now we all know what your lovely family looked like too.
Ah, they're nice. Quickly, though, I know I've only got a minute. David Miller, right?
Yeah.
He actually produces ever such a nice music program on the radio, Classic FM, on a weekend. And his knowledge of the music is...
He's excellent on music. He's an expert, as are many of you, amateurs and professionals, who has listened and watched